Happy Sunday to everyone out there. Today, I wanted to talk a little bit about the ideas of complexity and chaos. I read a great book recently that we'll probably do maybe a book club or something like that in the near future that really caused me to think about where humanity is in its progress and how the ideas of complexity and chaos affect us, both in our daily lives, but also in the broader scope of human progress. So, to start this off, the world is obviously a very complex place. It's very difficult to think about even where these devices came from that we're watching this on, how it is that this piece of information showed up in front of us today. So to really think through the levels of complexity that surround us on a daily basis, I wanted to offer a little bit of a balance in perspective between the ideas of complexity and chaos. Now, complexity, if you think about it, is really the manifestation of human progress up to this point. And even though we understand that it's there, it's almost transparent to us. And it's difficult, I think, for us to understand and then value that complexity. So a couple of ways to think about complexity in today's environment. One is the network of human connections today is mind-bogglingly complex. When you think about the people we come into contact with around the world, just the interaction of goods and services as they transit the globe, it's really, really deep to think about how people are adding value to little bits of things that aggregate as products, connections, communication, move their way around the globe. Now, complexity isn't simply order, right? It's not just that there's a structure to things, because it's not just some rigidly defined concept. Complexity is really the sum of the layers of foundations, right? Different kinds of foundations that have come together and in a way elevate humanity's reach. Everything that has come before us, whether it's the idea of writing and the ability to store food for more than one season, all the way through how fossil fuels caused the Industrial Revolution to today, where we see where the idea of globalization has created an entirely different value system than what could have possibly existed before. But all of those things only exist because of the layers that came before them. So complexity isn't that we've defined really complicated legal codes, right? That's a codification of certain types of complexity, but really complexity is a broad topic, is the aggregation of all the things that have come before and how they all connect to each other and interlock into the support structure that we have today. Now, from the humanist perspective, complexity is a good thing, but it's not an end in itself, right? The goal is not simply to make things more complex, but to make our world more complex and our ability to affect our world more complex, but in a way that helps humanity survive and thrive, right? Because there is complexity for the sake of complexity, but that might lead to a foundation that ends up being really fragile, right? Or very unstable. So while the complexity is necessary for human progress, it's not an end of itself. So for instance, within the context of humanity, the goal isn't simply just more humans, right? Humanism definitely benefits from more humans who are creating and adding meaning to the human existence. But it's not just like, hey, if we increase the number of humans, it's automatically more good, right? Even in today's world, we're seeing that we've got a lot of humans, we're consuming a lot of things, but those two things together don't necessarily mean that the world is in a better place. So complexity within the humanist ideology is more about advancing the human narrative, creating more meaning, and creating a future in which humanity can survive and thrive. Now, complexity can manifest in different ways, right? Like I said, it could turn out that complexity in one way, right? If we're adding complexity where we become reliant on certain technology and ideas that came before us, might lead us to a fragile state where humanity's future is at risk. Or it might lead us to a prosperous future where we learn to balance our progress and our conservation, which I'll talk more about in a moment. So it's, again, not an end in and of itself, but something that we have to consider as a necessity and used in a way that actually promotes that future of survival and thriving. And so this idea of complexity is important, but much like the ideas of progress and conservation, it's not something that we can say, oh yeah, more complexity is more good. So when I think about human progress, right, and just the evolution of our species, and really of any species that doesn't progress, that doesn't evolve, eventually dies out because conditions always change. Now, when it comes to humans, though, in particular, there's an element of conservation that is necessary because humans are narrative creatures. We're creatures that understand our place in the world by the story we tell ourselves, by our connection to our past. And so I think about progress and conservation like a bungee cord, where progress pulls us forward, but conservation anchors it to our connection to the past. And you have to have both, because unbounded progress is likely to snap that bungee cord and end up taking us in directions that are potentially harmful. When we've seen, for instance, nuclear weapons, right, have created a world that is potentially, a blink away from not existing, or the development of AI, or the development of diseases through weaponized research. Those are things that's progress, but maybe that's progress that we don't necessarily need. Now, it's hard to say because it's difficult to see what the consequences will be of those actions, but those are examples of where we really have to consider, yes, we can have progress, but not for the sake of progress. It has to be progress to bring humanity forward. Now, conservation without progress is stagnation, and that means that species dies off. So it's the balance of those things. So much like those as a whole concept, both progress and conservation together, complexity is what happens when you have progress and ideally balanced by conservation. That sort of complexity creates a future that's more beneficial for humanity. So now I want to talk about chaos. Another way to say chaos is to talk about the physics concept of entropy, right? And entropy is the natural inclination of a system to decay toward chaos and random distribution. That's what I mean by chaos. And so a randomly distributed system is not necessarily, or is usually not complex, right? It's just things that are out there. There's no structure to it. There's no meaning to it. And so when we think about this concept of chaos or entropy, it's something that we have to think of as the opposite of complexity. Now, in today's world, in the stories we tell ourselves, there are a lot of people who promote a worldview that is more simplistic, us and them, right? Good and bad. The way it was better. That's a really dangerous outlook. Now, there may be elements of what they are talking about that are good to conserve, but the way they're talking about it is to say, we shouldn't have complexity. We shouldn't have progress. If we just stay where we are, it'll be fine. And again, the fundamental principle of any species, if it doesn't progress as the situation changes, it will die out. And so another reason that that worldview is really dangerous is that it's far, far simpler to destroy than it is to create. It's easier to reduce complexity than it is to build it. And again, this is a principle of physics where it always takes energy to combat entropy, to make a system go to a higher level of complexity. And that's what we built. Everything around us in the world today is built on the complexity of thousands of years of human progress and humans adding meaning to our broader narrative. So if we are in today's world to say, oh no, we should go to a lower level of complexity, what we're doing is we're giving up on and destroying the meaning that's been created up to this point. Now, the challenge with that, especially in today's world, is that we are reaching somewhat of a peak of human progress when it comes to energy, right? One of the challenges in today's world is that demographics around the world are starting to flatten. And that means that there's going to be a decrease in the performance of economies in particular, but potentially even in humanity. that could be a really dangerous thing where we're not going to have the inflationary pressures of growth buoying us and saying, oh, everything's great and everything's always going to get better. And that's hard for people to understand because throughout most of the lives of people who are alive today, things have consistently improved. But what happens if that's no longer the case? What ideology will continue to help us progress through that challenging time? Now, my hope is what we talk about here in the ideas of humanism will help us progress through that. But if not, then we face a new dark age. And that to me is a very challenging and potentially frightening thing. And so it's going to take us engaging and having conversations to continue to promote the ideas of complexity and progress moderated by a solid amount of conservation. But we cannot fall victim to these ideas that, oh, if we just move to something simpler and if we just follow the checklist, everything will be okay. Because I don't think that's the case. And unfortunately, that's the challenge of humanism, is that we cannot simply accept that there's some checklist and if we follow it, everything will be okay, right? Our ideology is based on the idea that I think, therefore I am, and I have to determine what is right. And my community can help me and my learning can help me, but ultimately I'm the decider. I'm the arbiter of what is right and wrong. Not in the sense of relativism, but in the sense that it's my responsibility to understand how I affect my family, my community, and the world around me. So how do we start to think about this in today's society? What happens when too many humans choose simplicity and they choose to go the route of chaos? Is there a tipping point to that? Right? Is there a tipping point beyond which humanity doesn't survive? That's a concern we have to grapple with, and something where we can bring our goodness into the world and our ideas to try and preserve that complexity and that progress. So what causes us to not choose complexity, right? It's things like the rudimentary tribalism, where we only think, oh no, I just want to do good by my group and it doesn't matter what happens outside of our group, right? And that's a very simple way to look at the interactions that exist in the world today. We know that what we do affects people around the globe. We know, for instance, that pollution here affects people in developing countries that are much more likely to be impacted by climate change. But it's hard to pull that to the front of our minds on a daily basis. And so when we don't use really our front brain, when we're not using our system two thinking, if you've read about that before, where we're really considering every once in a while what it is we're doing, what is right. And we dig into the complexity out there and we do our homework and we actually do what we would call secondary research, right? Not primary research, but we're going out there and we're reading expert opinions and we're trying to understand, all right, this is my responsibility. I want to act better. I want to set the example. Then the default is to choose simplicity or choose tribalism. It's easier. Our brains are programmed for it. It's a shortcut. So how do we choose complexity? What things can we do on a daily basis to help us choose to add to the world's complexity, to make it where humans have bigger and better reach, that we can better affect the world around us in ways that are helpful, that help humanity survive and thrive? So instinct is a little bit, right? That gets us to our basic survival skills and protecting our family. Our shared beliefs, our culture, right? That's our tribe, that's our community. And ideally, we're choosing and building good communities and good tribes to exist in. And that's the basic level of human existence, and that's good. And then we have systems and processes that help us to codify things that we know are right and good. Things as simple as everybody stopping at a stop sign so people don't crash into each other, right? That's a way to create complexity in the sense of we have the ability to travel, but also simplifying it to a basic set of rules that we know how to act and maintain that complexity, right? And yeah, it takes a little bit of energy. We got to stop and we've got to think, we've got to look around, but it helps the whole system function. And then training and education. This is the key component to living in the modern world. We have to educate ourselves. We have to educate our families. We have to educate our communities. And that process must never stop. Once we're done with high school or college, that doesn't mean education is over. We have to constantly input the energy to maintain the complex system. And even if that complex system is only our mind and our understanding of the world, it requires constant energy input to maintain that level. And what that does, that training, that education allows us to engage our front brain more. To every once in a while, and as much as we can, we stop and think about, is it right for me to recycle this cup? Is it good for me to get out of my comfort zone and go talk to people? Is it good for me to go out and engage in local politics, even if it's unfortunately today nasty and hateful? And if we use these principles of humanism and we understand that complexity is necessary for human progress and that it takes energy to maintain that complexity, then we start to see that we've got regular responsibilities to go out and engage. So I think these things are really important for us to reckon with on a regular basis. And hopefully, a weekly service like this allows us to do so. So the call to action, right? So how do we build and maintain that complexity? Like I said, we've got to put our energy into maintaining it. That's on a daily basis with our families, with our communities, with the humanity that surrounds us. We've got to build human connection though, too, right? It's not just about being out there to promote your idea or your cause. It's about being kind to each other. It's establishing the norms in our culture that we're going to be kind. We're going to consider other people's perspective. We're going to engage them with a desire to understand and to learn and not to simply debate and deride. We're going to be an example for others to emulate. We're going to speak out for what we think is right. Again, with that idea that, hey, we need to speak out on some things, and it's okay if people disagree, but we're not going to do it to put others down. And it's always going to be your call what that right thing is. You have to derive the formula for what's right based on your understanding. And we've got some other talks out there that can help you to do that and think through how you build a philosophical system based on humanism or other ideas. And you got to join with others to hold accountable systems, processes, other people, so that we can keep changing and build the kind of complexity that's going to help create a better future. And we've got to oppose entropy and oppose chaos. We've got to oppose simplistic views that reduce human existence down to one thing or the other. Nothing is that simple. And we have to value the fact that things are going to be complex, and that sometimes makes them hard. But that complexity, again, is the entire thing that our current existence is based on. Because otherwise, we're going back to being hunter-gatherers, and we're going back to a humanity that cannot affect its future, that cannot survive and thrive in the long run. We're at the mercies of the forces of the universe. And we've got another talk on that for those who are interested in the current four horsemen of the apocalypse, or what would stop humanity in today's world. We've got to educate ourselves. We've got to educate others. We have to make this the core of what it means to be human and to be humanist. This is the biggest investment we can make in maintaining our ability as a human species to understand and advance complexity and progress. And we've got to study, we've got to invent, build, maintain, and sustain our community. Start there. Do the same with our environment and the necessary and fundamental conditions for human existence. Again, we've got to understand that value of the balance between progress and conservation, right? We have to progress. We have to continue to adapt and evolve, but we can't lose our human narrative. We can't lose the things that have been valuable to us as a species. And then finally, with all of our humanism, we have to expand our sense of self as much as we possibly can, from our individual self to our family, to our community. And then ideally, as we learn and we grow, we learn to understand our connection and our impact on the rest of humanity. So with that, I'm very thankful for you all listening to this talk today. I hope it helps you consider the world around you. And I hope to see you again soon as we make our world a better place for humanity to survive and thrive.